Okay, gonna do an engine video and running. I want to go over it with you real quick. This is the first video of the series of 5 or 6 videos you'll see. Basically, each of them going over um, each of the areas that are highlights, basically. So it's a 86 and it's all stock, except for it's been restored, not by us. It was restored about 5 years ago. And it's pretty clean still. I mean, it's got a little bit of, wear, but to be honest with you, we haven't driven it much. We actually bought it at a collector car auction around that time and then brought it up here. We drove it for a little bit. It had a carburetor on it, which I didn't like because it didn't run great, or at least cold starts wasn't great, and fuel mileage wasn't great. So plan was to put a fuel injection kit on it, which we have since done, but bought fuel injection, and then it took me a few years to finally get around to putting it on. So it's sat in our garage, literally this garage, for the last 3 years. It's in really good shape. So the motor was gone through when it was restored. It was rebuilt at that time. On the body, as far as what wasn't replaced, which is basically just the steel on it, everything from the suspension to the engine to the everything was refreshed on this thing. But it does have 190K on the body, which is the odometer, I think is 190. I'll double check that for you in a minute. Since the rebuild, it's probably got about 25,000 miles since the rebuild on everything. So it runs really well. The only thing I haven't done on it since we've done fuel injection and since it's sat for so long is a recent tune-up. So that would probably help. But otherwise, it's in great shape. The fuel injection kit was just literally finished, and that's about time we decided, you know what, let's put this fuel injection kit on it and sell it and put our money into our business and our family that we are trying to start. Okay, so it's got the Hal fuel injection, and that computer is under there. Trying to make it as slick as possible. The kit kind of says to put it under the dash, but the wires get all crazy, and I just didn't like cutting through the firewall. So we did it here. The little light you see here will be your engine light if there's ever an issue. That guy will stay on and whatnot. It has all the original smog equipment. We haven't pulled off anything on this engine that it came with when we got it, and all the smog equipment is still intact, including the pump, which is down there. You can't really see it, but that's the smog pump right there. All those tubes, all that's all emission stuff. So if you live in a non-emission area and never plan on putting it in an emission area, you can pull that stuff off, and it will run quite a bit better. But if you live in an emission area like most of us do, then you don't want to do that. They're not easy to come by. That stuff's very difficult to come by, actually, especially on these motors. And it makes it nearly impossible to get them to pass if you don't have them. So fuel injection's added, but we still have all the emission stuff on, which is kind of the 2-for-1 you get on that. A lot of people add fuel injection and think they can pull that stuff off, and you cannot, because states still do visual inspections, and that stuff is very difficult to find. So again, it's a 360 5.9 liter. It's got about 25,000-ish miles, not more than 30, since it was restored about 5 years ago. So those are kind of the highlights of it and whatnot. It hasn't been started since the injection kit was put on it, which was about 2 weeks ago. He finished. We were settling up some. We were trying to find a better air cleaner to put on. This is the factory air cleaner, and we went out and got a chrome one, and it just looked weird. So we went back to factory. You can put something else on if you want. It does have AC on it. It did blow cold a couple years ago when we were driving this more frequently, but it's been sitting so long it probably needs to be charged. But that is intact. Everything is there. And if you wanted to, you could clean up the wiring, although it doesn't look bad. You could put a wire loom on it, black or something, and really hide all that. All that stuff you're seeing there is all for the fuel injection. Okay? So, last but not least, the Hal fuel injection kit we went with is the 50 state legal kit. So, it shouldn't really need anything to get it to pass emissions at this point, other than just driving it, because, like I said, it's been sitting for a long time, so the fuel's a little old in it and whatnot. And then, again, sorry I'm blabbing on here, but I think it's important, especially for a vehicle that's in as good a shape as this is, and you'll be spending a decent amount of money on it. is, oh, let's see, oh, fuel injection. The reason we put fuel injection on it, and that's the original carburetor, which is the factory one, is it ran great once it got warmed up. Fuel mileage wasn't incredible, but it's never going to be. It's a heavy vehicle with a big motor. But I thought we could probably do better on fuel mileage, but most importantly was the cold starts. It was a complete dog to start this thing up. In cold weather, or even on a summer day, if it's been sitting for a while, it's still a pain in the ass. So carburetors were great back in their day, but you know, things, gasoline, everything's different these days, and really the fuel injection really brought this motor to life. It's got pickup, it goes. I probably would do a tune-up on it if I were you. These plugs are probably as old as the restoration was done, but nonetheless they'll fire right up, I'm sure of it, even though it hasn't been fired up in a while. So it's cold. These are, you know, radiators ice cold. I'll show you the temp gauge here. And so when I used to start this thing, it literally would take me about 15 minutes to get it running, especially on a cold morning. And it was just this back and forth, you know, crank it, rev it up, let it idle, and then, you know, come back out and it'd be dead, or, you know, not started. So, without further ado, I'm not going to give it any gas. I want you to see. Let me focus that for you. Well, first off, let me show you this. So that's the temp gauge right here. So it's cold. There's absolutely no, you know, in it, and doesn't look like there's much fuel in it either. So we'll have to be careful on our test drive. All the gauges work. There's battery gauge, oil pressure gauge. It reads high right now because it's not started, and whatnot. So again, normally come in here and put a couple pumps. With fuel injection, you might have to give a little fuel, but it should pretty much fire right up. Let's see how she does. So that's pretty much how it runs, how it should run. We'll let it warm up a little bit. It looks like the oil pressure gauge is still acting up a little bit. It's kind of intermittent. It'll go good and then it'll ping itself out there. So kind of the problems of the electrical things that Chrysler AMC kind of went through. So, but actually that thing was working just fine the other day when I drove it. So I'm not sure what's going on with it right now. Maybe it'll hit a bump and it'll kick back in. Otherwise, the thing is really nice, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Horn works, battery gauge works, temperature, we'll let it get up to temp here. That looks like there's a little bit more fuel in there. Fuel's really old. It's at least 2 or 3 years old, and it hasn't had a tune-up in a while. Well, probably since it's been restored. So anyway, and that you're hearing there is the pulley, and it'll quiet down a little bit as it gets warmed up. We were gonna just take it off. It's one of these pulleys is squeaking. So as it gets warmer, it'll quiet itself down. But you can replace it. My suggestion would be to put a new powertrain pump on it. I think that's the bearing. It's really easy to do that on there. Okay, so that's that. If there's any questions, comments, please feel free to shoot us a message, and we will go from there. We do have it does have a clean title, and it is ready to rock. So actually, it might be this AC. Yeah, it almost goes away. So anyway, that's that. I hope you enjoyed the video and look forward to seeing the other videos. And if you care to see this tailpipe, no smoke. That's what it should be. When it was carbureted, it would smoke a little bit, you know. So that fuel injection really has helped a lot. So. And now the pulley load is finished down. So, all right. Again, sorry for the length of this. I do appreciate you watching it, and definitely check out all the videos in this series. And good luck. You know, let us know if you want to make a deal on it. We have big comments. So, thank you.